We are all living in a changing climate. The last 5 years were the warmest on record ever. And extreme weather events happen almost everywhere in the world. We also know now that heat waves, droughts, and heavy precipitation increased in some areas of the world. They increased either in intensity, it's getting warmer, in frequency, the extreme is coming more often, or in duration, it takes longer. And this was developed out of a statistical database of about 5 decades in which the globe warmed by ½ a degree. So ½ a degree warming led to a change in some extremes, in some, and you can say several areas of the world. So another ½ degree might also lead to more changes. Why should this not go linearly, at least linearly? So how do we know all this? At the Paris Agreement in 2015, the United Nations were discussing, should we try to limit global warming by the end of this century to 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels, or only to 1.5? And of course, the low-lying island states were heavily pushing towards 1.5 degree. And at that time, they sent a message to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to analyze the literature and assess, is there a difference between ½ a degree of warming by the end of the century? So more than 100 authors assessed more than 6,000 papers. In 3 review rounds, we got more than 42,000 comments, and we answered all of them. And the report which came out, you see here, the report on the special report of the IPCC on 1.5 degree global warming. I'm not always saying global warming compared to pre-industrial levels, it's a bit long, but you know what I mean. So where are we? So this ½ degree, which has been discussed politically, was now in the focus of the research, and even me as a meteorologist, I thought a little bit ½ a degree, so much of weather variability in it, do we really see a change? And I would like to show this to you today. Currently, we know that the globe warmed by more than 1 degree. We see consequences on all systems, people, nature, livelihood. And if we warm like we do at a current rate of 0.2 degrees centigrade every decade, we are passing the 1.5 aim threshold already between 2030 and 2050. The report also clearly states that if we would immediately reduce emissions significantly, the emissions which are currently in the atmosphere would not bring us to a 1.5 degree above pre-industrial level. So this means action helps and action matters. So what are the impacts if we would limit the warming to 1.5 compared to 2? We would of course have less extreme weather events. We would have a global mean sea level rise about 10 centimeters less than with 2 degrees. And now you say, what about 10 centimeters? Is this much? But don't forget that there's saltwater intrusion inland and that the freshwater zone is shifted and land is lost for food production. Of course, less people would be affected. We would see less effect on biodiversity. It would have smaller reductions on yield of maize, rice and wheat, and the population which would be experience water shortages would be 50% less. It's up to several 100 million fewer people would be exposed to climate threats and susceptible to poverty by 2050, which is soon. So let me walk you through a bit of a difficult slide, but I would like to show you what's the difference ½ a degree makes. These are the so-called reasons for concern. They have been developed in one of the former IPCC processes. It's an amber diagram which says where the white color is, not much is impacted and happening, and then it goes through yellow and to the purple one where the risk is extremely high. So if we look at the gray bar, then we see where we are today. This is about 1 degree warming, and we have several ecosystems here. Warm water corals, we have extremes, fluvial flooding, we have sector here. And if we see how these systems would be affected at 1.5 degree, you see it already here. And if you see the warm water coral reefs, they can barely survive current situations. And with 1.5, they already reach the purple range. But with 2 degree warming, always by the end of the century, they would be lost. Differently to mangroves, they seem to be quite stable. But being honest, after we have published the report, 3 months later, a paper came out saying they are not so invulnerable. They are also vulnerable, and if the connection between temperature and water is in the right condition, they can even die. So let's look at a sector like tourism. Tourism, of course, can regionally benefit. So it's very important to understand what are the regional and sector and cross-sectoral differences between 0.5 degree warming. And 1.5 degree is very clear, is better than 2. So let's go see, and how do we get there? If we want to get there, we have to limit global warming, and we have to do this by reducing emissions about 45% by 2030. We have to reach net zero by 2050, and that means, net zero means the emissions which we still emit, we have to take out of the atmosphere, either through afforestation or land use management, or through technologies. But it would also have benefits in reducing non-CO2 emissions. Direct and immediate health benefits are expected and reported. So how do we get there? We only get there with this unprecedented change. Systems transitions are needed, deep emission cuts in all sectors are needed, a range of technology and behavioral changes are needed. And of course, we have to divert the flow of investment. But what can happen on our way towards the end of this century? This is a slide which shows you where we are currently, roughly. In this part here, 2020 to 2100, you see that even if we would be able to reduce the emissions in a way that we reach 1.5 at the end of the century, there is a momentum of urgency in it. Because the longer we wait, the stronger the overshoot is. And here is a 1.5 degree line. So we will, in the middle of this century, overshooting the 1.5 degree warming. And this is, of course, much stronger in some regions of the world. And the longer we wait, the stronger the overshoot will be. And the more difficult it will be finding technologies to reduce the emissions as needed. So it's very important to understand that research and services are supporting those transitions and the transformation of societal challenges. We have to be aware that we are just at the beginning of a new era. And for this, we need fact-based, solid information, for example, from climate assessments. But we also need, this is actually the adaptation cycle. We have to introduce our scientific findings in all phases of adaptation, in the identification of adaptation options together with the experts. But in the implementation, make sure that the implementation is done in a way that what we implement still works under climate change in 20 years from now. So it's very important that we bring these societal partners and players together. And Helmholtz, thanks to Mr. Wiesler, already started last year a Helmholtz initiative on climate adaptation and mitigation. And these are two sides of the same coin. And we will look at the net zero. How can we reach in Germany a situation where in 2050 the emissions which we still have to emit will also be extracted? And we would like to support scientifically the development of a national roadmap for Germany towards being net zero at 2050. And the second side of the coin, at the same time, we know that we have to adapt to what has changed already. And our infrastructure has been built with the weather 50, 60 years ago. And you know that we are already facing the problems with heavy precipitation, warm summers, nice sometimes for some sectors, not so nice for others. So it's very important that we understand that all our adaptation activities are fit for the purpose and long-lasting, that they are also fit for a changed climate in 20, 30 years from now. So I hope I showed you that half a degree matters. And I think it's very important to understand that the report clearly stated there is no physical, chemical, technological, financial, or cultural reason not to limit global warming at 1.5 degrees at the end of this century. It is all about political will. And is all about engagement of the local society up to the international policy. So I think it's important for us to understand, let's join forces to limit global warming to not more than 1.5 degrees. It is doable, and we have no choice. Thank you.